Washington Tech Policy Podcast, episode number 1.
Moving the needle. Welcome to the Washington Tech Policy Podcast.
Curating communications, media, and tech policy news so you don't have to. News, interviews, everything you need without the axe to grind. It's the Washington Tech Policy Podcast with Joe Miller.
The DOJ drops espionage charges against a Temple professor. The U.S. and EU agree to share data, and the FCC establishes a hot clock for Charter and Time Warner Cable. The House passed legislation last Tuesday entitled the E-Warranty Act, which would allow electronic device makers to issue warranty information electronically. Currently, device makers are required to issue warranty information via print. Of the 309 representatives who voted, just 2 opposed: Michigan Republican Representative Dr. Dan Benishek and North Carolina Republican Walter Jones, Jr. The next step is President Obama's desk for signature. The Justice Department has dropped its economic espionage charges against Temple University professor and physics department chair Chi Ching. Chi was originally charged with wire fraud and attempting to share competitive information about a semiconductor company with China. The U.S. and EU have agreed to a data sharing agreement despite a strained relationship following the Ed Snowden leaks. Under the agreement, EU citizens would have the right to sue in the U.S. if their personal data is misused. But Congress would have to pass a law first, and the Judicial Redress Act, co-sponsored by Connecticut Republican Chris Murphy and Senate Finance Committee Chairman Republican Orrin Hatch, seeks to do just that. The FCC has established its shot clock for its review of the Charter-Time Warner Cable merger. Comments are due October 13th. Reply comments are due on November 2nd. The FCC is coming down on Lyft, the car-sharing service, for its robocalls. Users are currently unable to use Lyft's services without giving automatic consent to receive robocalls. The FCC warned Lyft that the policy violates the Telephone Consumer Protection Act because there is no genuine opt-out. The FAA is supposed to pass regulations by September 30th, which would pave the way for commercial drone use, but it looks like the agency is going to miss the deadline. And at a House Judiciary Committee subcommittee hearing last Thursday, California Republican Representative Darrell Issa said the FAA's delay is a punt. New York Democratic Representative Jerry Nadler said addressing the safety of drones will take time, as will the appropriate distinction between the FCC's authority to regulate drone transmissions and the FAA's authority to regulate airspace. Jesse Jackson Sr. is expanding his efforts to improve diversity and inclusion in the tech sector by focusing now on so-called unicorn startups, those worth $1 billion or more. Few of these companies have released their diversity statistics. Tech and auto companies have come together with a proposal to share the 5.9 gigahertz band. The FCC would bear the burden of addressing any signal interference. At an American Enterprise Institute event, FCC Republican Commissioner Ajit Pai said the FCC's net neutrality order has reduced investment in telecom. I'm so proud today to have Kim Scott on the show. There's a reason why Kim is the guest for episode number 1. She is just a rock star. She has countless NSF grants. She's been honored by the White House. She's just an amazing person, an inspiring person. Dr. Kimberly Scott is associate professor in the School of Social Transformation, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Arizona State University. She also serves as Compugirls executive director. She earned her Ed.D. from Rutgers, and prior to coming to ASU in August 2006, Dr. Scott was associate professor in Foundations, Leadership, and Policy Studies in the School of Education and Allied Human Services at Hofstra. There she also founded, directed, and co-directed TLC, a program for girls of color and their parents from Long Island, New York's high-need districts. For 5 years, she organized TLC's after-school and summer sessions, which provided mentoring, technology workshops, Girl Scout troop meetings, music lessons, and parent sessions to over 40 participants. Without further ado, let's transition over to the interview. So Kim, welcome.
Thank you so much.
It's great having you on the show.
Great to be here.
So tell me a little bit about what first interested you in focusing on science, technology, engineering, and math education.
That's a good question because I am a social scientist, if you will, by trade. My background in particular is education. And I started my career in this domain working in an urban school district that was considered high needs. And it was during my time in that setting that I noted the differential teaching that was going on from classroom to classroom and certainly school to school, and how unfortunately so many teachers maintain ridiculously low expectations for our kids, believing that they wouldn't do much beyond high school, even if they got to that point. And I was really, really disturbed by that. I mean, how can we have, and at this point this was the late 90s, how can we maintain this dual system that so many scholars have talked about and maintain any good consciousness? And so I've always had a heightened sensitivity to these issues of equity and equality, knowing that the two concepts are not the same. And so when I began my career in higher education, I wanted to really look at the issues of disparity. And at that time, it was mainly looking at issues of disparity along race and gender divides. My dissertation, which still makes me smile, was on first grade African American girls' play patterns. Anyway, after my dissertation at Rutgers University, and I got my first teaching position at a university in New York, I took a lot of the lessons learned from looking at black girls' play patterns and how they were positioned and saw themselves in the informal space of playgrounds, and looked at an older group of girls, looking at teen girls. And it was during that foray that I remembered what one of my mentors said, which was a lot of times we scholars treat sites like plantations. We oftentimes will go into a school site and we'll cull all this information, we'll expend an inordinate amount of other people's time, really just for our own benefit, whether it be for scholarship or for promotion or what have you. And so it was impressed upon me, and I internalized the fact that we should always give back to sites as they're giving of their time. So long story short, I was working in this highly politicized school district in New York, playing off the information that I had garnered from my dissertation and looking at 8th grade girls and how they were making sense of the political fervor of their particular time. And at the end, I orchestrated conversations with the girls as well as their parents to say, hey, did I get it right? Does it make sense what my interpretations are of the data? And by happenstance, I was also working with the Girl Scouts. I'm a big Girl Scout proponent. And the Girl Scouts in this particular area wanted to pilot an E-troop. And so the parents and the girls that were in my study, they wanted to continue the conversations that had become part of my data checking technique. And the Girl Scouts wanted to have an E-troop, and I said, hey, why don't I put the two interests together? And I started a program called Teaching, Learning, and Community. And there was three-pronged. There was a mentoring piece, technology piece, and then a parent piece. And all three of these arms spoke to my interest, again, in disparity, that it's not enough to simply say you need to get the basic education as, in this case, a girl of color. It's not enough to just understand the technical skills or the knowledge in one area or the other. You need to have a more holistic approach and really understand the system, its expectations along various divides, and then how to implement that while at the same time further your community. It's not enough to simply say success is bound to how far away I can get from my community with, in this sense, new technological skills. what I think is of greater importance is how can I use these technological skills in a way that moves my background, my heritage, my family, my friends, my peers, so that we can all come up together and change the system for the better.
So let's go way back when you first started this work. When you mentioned earlier about disparate treatment, what are some examples that you saw going on in the classroom? Was there a particular incident that happened that you noticed that kind of made you go home at the end of the day feeling like you needed to do something? Was there something that happened on a particular day?
Yes, I'll never forget this. There's this one incident. There was a teacher who always yelled at the kids, and her classroom was down the hall from mine, so maybe 50 meters away.
And this was in New York?
This was in New Jersey.
Oh, Jersey. Okay, so yeah, teachers yell at the kids.
Yeah, she was always yelling at the kids.
Right.
And so one morning I came in early, and it was before the kids were in the classroom, and I heard her yelling. And I was thinking to myself, oh, that's kind of odd because it's a little early for her to be yelling to an empty classroom. Nevertheless, she goes on her rant, and then immediately following, I heard another voice yelling, and it wasn't a child, it was an adult. Then I hear a bunch of people running, and there's a scuffle. And long story short, she was yelling, the teacher was yelling at a parent, the parent took offense, and the parent yelled back and cornered the teacher. And so the police were called. The next year, I coincidentally had that same parent's daughter in my class. And we had our first parent-teacher conference, and it was going very well. And the parent said, I have to pause and tell you that I recall you were there last year when I was talking with Mrs. So-and-so, and I want to give you my perspective. She said, I had to take off work that morning, and in doing so, I lost a fair amount of pay. But it was so important for me to speak to this teacher about my daughter because I care about her and I want her to do well. Mm-hmm. And she said for me to come into this classroom space where I knew she was yelling at the kids and treating them quite poorly, but for me to come into space, I've lost money, I care about my child, and for her to treat me so haphazardly, as if I don't care, and to yell at me. She said, I snapped. Now, is it excusable? No. But at the same time, I want you to understand my perspective. Mm-hmm. And that parent was one of the best advocates I have ever had with a parent. But I thought, you know what? I may be able to affect 30-some-odd kids in my classroom, and I'm excited about that. I love it. But if I could return to school and get my doctorate and work with education leaders and ultimately develop programs that are going to poise girls and boys of color who have been marginalized by class, gender, race, immigration status, and so many other different lines that divide us. If I can work with leaders and practitioners so that the impact can be more than just the 30 fantastic young people who I have the privilege of teaching, then I've done something.
And was this an affluent school district?
This is a low-income one,
low-income,
predominantly
okay.
African-American.
Yeah, because I don't know if you know, but my mom taught first grade, and I remember, sometimes she'd come home and she'd be so upset from what happened during the day. I never knew what happened, but you can really kind of see the effects that these kinds of things have on teachers, and so I can only imagine what it must have been like for you.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was a wonderful experience. It wasn't. I didn't feel downtrodden mm-hmm. or depressed. I felt more inspired as to how I can potentially affect change that goes beyond my classroom. I mean, the reality is, if we connect this back to STEM, is that in these non-white, majority-minority districts that have high rates of poverty, there is a greater likelihood that the teachers do not have experience in science or in technology, if it's even offered, and forget math. And that's a problem. And then we add on that the majority of kids of color, they have a greater likelihood to be in these schools than their white correlates. That's a problem. That problem that we have to hit from many different angles. From the classroom, making sure that we have experienced teachers that understand content knowledge, but also understand and value the cultural backgrounds of the students as assets, meaning their parents, their heritage, their experiences, that's one way that we can hit this problem. But then we also have to think about the leaders as well as the higher education institutions and then their preparation for those leaders and the requirements so that we can really move the dial.
So going back before, you said that there's a difference and that policymakers and educators need to understand the difference between equity and equality. How do you define those? What's the difference for you?
For me, equality is everyone gets the same. And equity is you get what you need in order to poise yourself to have the same opportunity as the other person. And so that may mean for schools where, and this is true, 23% of science classes at schools with highest concentrations of students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, meaning in schools that have 75 to 100% of students who qualify for free or reduced lunch, which means they're high needs, economically challenged schools, 23% of science classes are then taught by novice teachers. And compare that with 10% of science classes in schools with really, really low percentages of students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch. Mm-hmm. So does that mean that we just simply give to these schools, majority, minority, high reduced lunch, the same number of science teachers as those who have a lower concentration? In my mind, we're so beyond that problem. To provide just equal numbers is not enough. We need to give those disadvantaged districts not only the same number of teachers who have expertise in science, but then we also need to think about language arts. We need to also think about how the science is going to interact with the other disciplines. We also probably need to think about community after-school programs, because potentially the parents do not have access to the Capitol where their kids can take apart a robot and put it back together, an experience that many students have in the more economically advantaged areas. So it's not about the same, that's equality. It's about what can we do from many different angles to make sure all students are getting what they need in order to compete equally.
And there are some changes that the House is proposing to the ESEA Act, which was passed during the Johnson administration, which would actually change the way funding goes to Title I schools. So tell me about Compugirls. I'm interested in that because it's had such an impact. I was reading your bio, and there are 40 girls in the program currently. And what kinds of things do you do? Do you do some of this robotics? Some of the robotics stuff you mentioned. What are you working on, and how can folks bring it to their communities?
Yeah, good question. And so let me just correct you, Joseph, that presently I don't even know how many girls we have in the program because we're now in several states. But let me address your first question. So what is Compugirls? It's a multimedia program that is aiming for girls from high needs districts, ages 13 to 18, to increase their computational thinking skills in a fun, dynamic way. And so for us here in Compugirls, what we do is absolutely, we teach the girls the technical skills. So they learn how to create digital stories using iMovie or iLife. Yes, they learn how to do some basic coding using Scratch as an introduction. We often do HTML. We're doing some Python this summer. Absolutely. They learn how to build in virtual worlds and to explore issues about avatar creation and how to create museum-type spaces.
And just to clarify, Scratch is an entry animation program?
Yes, Scratch is an MIT-sponsored program. It's object-oriented way to teach programming.
Okay.
And girls can create games or simulations.
Okay.
What we do is teach the technical skills, but more importantly, we also teach the girls how to research responsibly a social or community issue by which they think needs to be addressed. And so the technology becomes a platform on which girls can tell their stories. They can make recommendations, whether it be about indigenous language and culture loss, which is one of the topics, racial profiling, or multiple myeloma and its differential impact according to ethnic communities. We have sites, multiple sites in Arizona, in Colorado. We're opening up new sites in California this summer, as well as New Jersey and New York, and looking towards the global landscape as well. And we're exceptionally excited because we're now able to offer additional curriculum. You talk about robotics. We are piloting robotics. We have an NSF robotics grant where the girls will indeed be researching a social community issue, but then they'll be teaching their robot, or they'll be programming their NAO robot, how to co-teach their topic to an audience. And then there's an engineering aspect of it, because once they co-teach, there'll be a robot rally, whereas 2 groups of girls will be selected to work with a group of engineers here at Arizona State University and to build something that they have proposed can address the problem that they and their co-robot will have taught to a community.
So let's talk about what's happening at home. Do you think there's more of a need for reform inside the classroom, or what's more? What do you think needs the most attention?
I think it's an and both, and not an either or. To be honest, Joseph, I honestly think that the vast majority of parents, irrespective of their economic standing, or so how poor they are or how marginalized, that they care about their children. Now, of course, there's exceptions, but I think we need to be really careful with maintaining the rhetoric that certain parents simply don't care. I think what's more important to think about is how we are categorizing care. That said, I do believe that, again, in my experience, especially with Compugirls, we have spent a fair amount of time orienting parents to the good work the girls are doing. And so we have initially a orientation ceremony for both parents and girls. 99% of parents will show up, even if they cannot speak the language of the person who is doing the talking, which we're also mindful of. But we make concerted efforts to make sure that our parents that are privileging us to loan us their daughters, they understand what their daughters are doing, and we're also making ourselves available. And I don't think that often happens for various reasons in some of the more high needs districts. And so I do think that schools need to spend more and more time interacting with parents, not as disinvited guests, but as true collaborators. I don't care where the parent is coming from. How can we engage parents and at times inform them as to how they can support their girls? And support may just simply be bringing them to an after-school program on time, making sure that they're fed.
So tell me about the pipeline and how Compugirls has affected the pipeline. You hear a lot about tech companies having just terrible diversity numbers. I mean, it's in the single digits for minorities, single digits in many cases for women. Has Compugirls made a dent in that? Is it something?
We'd like to believe that we have. What I find interesting, a lot of people don't think about this data, but African American and Latina girls oftentimes voice greater interest in science, technology, engineering, and math than their white correlates. They're more interested.
Right.
But something funky happens around really grade 4, but then again in grade 8, where their interests start to decline. And there's lots of factors that are contributing to the decline, one of which is role models, teachers motivating them or not motivating them, whether it be encouraging them to take this class versus that class. There's also school systems. As I said earlier, are the school systems able to offer, particularly for the older kids, AP computer science classes? Well, the higher the concentration of kids that are eligible for free and reduced lunch, the less likely those schools are offering AP computer science class, or even have a teacher who has expertise in computer science, or maybe they have one teacher, but he or she doesn't have a support system or access to professional development to keep abreast of the technological advancements, and we know that they're always changing. And then on top of that, we have these we have these beliefs that unfortunately still hold true for many, that in order to be a computer scientist, you have to sit at your desk by yourself. You probably wear a white coat, and the most successful computer scientists are white or Asian American males. And the majority of girls and boys do believe that. What we've seen in our data with Compugirls is once the girls have even gone through one course with us, one course maybe 40 hours, they start to question that image and say, hey, I could be a computer scientist. But they also start to see that they can use their skills in many different ways and in many different disciplines, and it doesn't necessarily mean being a computer scientist, but being a technologist that can contribute to the 21st century in ways that we can't even imagine.
So you have a new center in the works, right? The Center for Gender Equity in Science and Technology?
Yeah, I'm so excited about this. It's an Arizona State University situated center. To the best of my knowledge, it's the only one of its kind nationally, in that we are going to be focused exclusively on African American, Asian American, Latina, and American Indian girls, women, and their science, technology, engineering, and math experiences. What really thrills me about the center and the opportunities are that we're going to have a three-pronged approach. So we're going to be generating knowledge in a coordinated effort as to what are some of the best practices that program developers and researchers have identified that seem to work well with these communities. What are some of the structural barriers? How does it differ according to disciplines? And then use this information for the second arm, which is capacity building, offering programs that are evidence-based, and also trying to build the capacity of communities that do not necessarily have sustained opportunities to these evidence-based programs specific to our daughters. And the third one is advocacy. How do we use the information from the knowledge-generating arm and the program capacity-building arm to get advocates and allies to make sure that our efforts are continuing on in perpetuity.
I love it. I love this. And I have two girls, and they're going to be, I'm going to send them your way, Kim.
Great.
When they're old enough. You're the first person we're going to call, because, I mean, you are the, should I say guru? Is that appropriate for a scholar of your caliber? I don't know if it is, but that's the best I can do. So Dr. Kim Scott, Associate Professor at the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State. She's also the founder and executive director of the award-winning program Compugirls. Dr. Kim Scott, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Joseph.
Take care. Wasn't she great? And Kim is doing more and more work with the White House and with others here in Washington, so you can expect to hear more and more from her. Thanks for listening to the show today. We will catch you back here next time. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Washing Tech Policy Podcast. You've been briefed.